know what we do, but for those of you that don't, we do many different things. We fund library programming and facilities enhancements, and we bring community events like our monthly forum. Next month we're the sponsors of the Luminary Festival, so more on that in a minute. And we also bring you our beloved St. Anthony Park Arts Fest in June. Not a lot of people know that, but we are the chief sponsor of the Arts Fest. So hopefully we'll see you in June when it's a little warmer. If I could just for a minute just highlight a couple things that we have coming up. Next month on February 13th, we'll be having a special guest lecture by Kristen Anderson, our resident St. Anthony Park historian, and she's giving a special lecture on the history of our iconic Milton Square across the street. So there's more information about that in the back. And then on Friday, February 14th, Valentine's Day, we kick off a 2-day Luminary Festival, and there are many activities associated with that, and again, there's information about that on the back, in the back. Oh, and then I can't forget March 14th, a Friday, is Pie Day, and we are celebrating Pie Day with pie and prizes and trivia and all kinds of fun things, and that will also be at the St. Anthony Park Lutheran Church. So if you're a great pie baker, enter the contest or come eat pizza. We'd love to see you there. Turning then to tonight's topic and our featured speaker, some of you know my day job used to be as a political scientist at the University of Minnesota. And one of the things that I studied, along with other political scientists across the country, was rising political polarization, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And I think as political scientists, we've done a pretty good job isolating some of the causes and the way they feed back and reinforce each other and kind of get us into a polarization doom loop. So they're political and institutional things, but I want to highlight tonight, because I think Bill is going to help us, that there are two fundamental tendencies of human nature that reinforce this political crisis that we're in. A psychologist would tell you about confirmation bias. As human beings, we tend to seek out and pay attention to information that confirms our biases, and we ignore or discount information that is contrary or challenge those beliefs. So that's a basic principle of human nature. And then a sociologist would tell you about the principle of homophily. And essentially homophily is the basic, the tired adage, birds of a feather flock together. We prefer to befriend and to live by and to interact with people who are just like us. In our own neighborhood, St. Anthony Park, as those of you will know who read last month's Bugle, we are a very good illustration of that bubble making here in this neighborhood. Now tonight we're trying to go beyond polarization, learning some tools and strategies that we can all use as citizens to help us kind of challenge those fundamental tendencies. And fortunately, we don't have to do that by ourselves, because tonight's guest is co-founder of Braver Angels, which over the years has grown into the nation's largest grassroots effort, who's dedicated to helping us bridge the political divide. So I'm very pleased to welcome Bill Doherty. He's a university researcher, a noted family therapist, and co-founder of Braver Angels, and I'm sure he'll give you more information about the kinds of things that Braver Angels does. So if you would join with me and welcome Bill Doherty.
Thank you. Wow. This is the home crowd for me here tonight, which is really nice, because I lived in Roseville with my wife and I for 38 years and taught on the St. Paul campus and been by here so often. So that doesn't mean, though, the home crowd is friendlier. It just means that that they have high expectations. So, and if you're from out of town, then they they really have high expectations. So I'm really happy to be with you. And I was thinking about your birds of a feather. Everyone's coming in all wrapped up. You know, our birds, we are birds who are surviving the winter. So happy to be with you. And we're going to be talking about polarization and then how we can cope emotionally and relationally. So that's going to be the theme here. And I'd like to begin by having a few of you introduce yourself and say briefly, why you came to a presentation on emotional and relational coping. I see you raise your eyes there. With this era of polarization. So who'd like to go first and introduce yourself? There's always some extroverts who, like me, who think other people are thrilled to hear. So, Mary, go, yeah.
My name is Mary Griffin, and my brother and his wife are of a different political persuasion than me, and I love them. And I need to talk to them for the rest of my life. So that's fine.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Somebody else introduce yourself and say why you came. Go for it.
I'll do that. My name is Warren Poole, and I'm a Trump supporter, and I love to make people uncomfortable. No, I don't. But I'm at St. Matthew's and part of the planning committee for the Prager Angels there. And it's been interesting to me to be able to sit down with people that don't think like I do and talk about things. And without that, my big conundrum is how do we get more people like me to show up? Because I'm kind of the lone curmudgeon who doesn't care really what people think of me, much to my wife's chagrin.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Yes, a little applause up here for yes. Okay. Yes, and I didn't hear it from your wife, by the way. But yes, go for it. Go for it. Yeah.
I just wanted to say I am a Trump supporter, and I'm a conservative person, and you're not a lone wolf, because I am
Great. So if you could introduce yourself and say why you came, that would be great.
I'm Coffee Monska, and I just have been studying civility with my friend Sarah Bello. I was excluded from a DEI anti-racism training at work because the people at the presentation didn't like what I had to say, and all of a sudden, all Black lives did not matter. And they told me I was no longer allowed to speak in the anti-racism. It was literally called that.
Yeah.
And instead of suing the workplace or going at them that way, Sarah and I decided for Equity Week to put on a presentation on civility, and over 350 people from the state of Minnesota attended. And we're just interested in doing more presentations on civility
And why did you come tonight?
to learn more, because we're just immersing ourselves
Good.
in learning.
Great. Thank you. I'm glad you're here. Let's hear from one other person. Introduce yourself and why you came. Go for it.
My name's Carrie Benefit. Probably the biggest reason I'm here is I live in the senior cooperative, and I'm finding, even though I've lived in almost 6 years, that there's some things I realized I wasn't prepared for in how to get along with differences, even though they're supposedly very similar.
Mhm. So political differences, among others.
Well, I mean, just even
Actually, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, and thanks for your introductions. So a little bit more, and Wendy gave a nice introduction to the polarization problem. It can be helpful to think big picture here, and then we'll dive into what do we do relationally. Polarization has been rising in the U.S. for 35 or 40 years. It did not start with Donald Trump's election, and it's been happening all over the democracies of the world. Look at what's happening in Europe, but think about Brexit, for example, and what's happening in France in terms. So we're dealing not with a phenomenon of the last decade that can be blamed on any particular individual. It's also been rising through multiple administrations, presidential administrations. So it's a big phenomenon. And what political scientists talk about is affective polarization. So not so much issues. There have been times in our history we've had more issues, far right, far left issues. This is more what they call affective. polarization. It's about how we feel about each other when we think and vote differently. And so it's been invading so much of our lives. So in 1960, only 5% of Americans said they would be uncomfortable with somebody in their family, their son or daughter, marrying somebody of the other party. 5% were uncomfortable with an inter-party marriage. Now it's up to 40 to 45%. Other attitudes like interracial marriage, those has become more accepted. So my wife Leah's here, and we got married in 1971, and it was a Catholic Lutheran. Could I hear like, when I say that, the young people, they go, huh? Okay. But that was a big deal. But Republican Democrat would not have been. Okay. So the other has become more political than religious, or in some cases even racial, because again, attitudes towards interracial marriage. So a number of social scientists have talked about three categories of this polarization. The first is othering, and that is that people who differ from you politically are alien, they're strangers. So I invite yourself to ask yourself how many times you have said to yourself or somebody in your life, how could those people possibly think this? Who are those people? Okay? And then, of course, the answers we come up with are not particularly flattering to them, and they're often not answers that they would recognize as the case for themselves. But othering, so they're strangers and aliens. Second is disdain. That is, I not only don't get them, I don't like them. And again, the political scientists have been studying this for some time. It's the rise of out-party hate. There's in-party love, out-party hate. It's not that we love our own side a lot more. We hate the other side. So anything that's bad for them, even if it's not good for my side, if they get it, then I'm happy. So othering, disdain, and the third one is that people who differ are morally suspect. They're unethical. They're bad people. My side wants what's best for the country. Your side is self-serving and deliberately undermining the flourishing of Americans. That's a potent brew. I don't get you, I don't like you, and you're immoral. Other than that, let's be friends. And so some of what's happened, and there's lots of reasons that we won't get into tonight, why this has been happening all over the world, but it's connected to something I do want to highlight, and that is a big decline in social trust. Big decline. We don't trust our institutions anymore, and that's really clear. This has been well documented. We don't trust the professions. We haven't trusted government in some time. Big decline in social trust, but there's also, and this is even more ominous to me, a big decline in trust for our fellow citizens, for other people. So in the early 70s, the majority of Americans said that most people can be counted on to do the right thing. Now it's about 27%. And each generation has been less trusting. So the youngest generation now coming along hold less trust than, so the Gen Zs, less trust in the Gen X, millennials, and all that group, I don't have them all memorized. But the boomers are a lot more trusting than those who follow. So that's pretty scary. That's pretty scary. But because, and now my view, because we are tribal people as humans, we're going to trust somebody. We're going to trust some group because we have to. We have to. Being isolated is not the thing that human beings like. And so we really tribalize and get into narrower and narrower groups, which actually threatens, by the way, both political parties, because both political parties are experiencing lots of tension within. Supporters of Trump and people that never Trumpers, for example, progressives and moderates. Just before the COVID, the DFL asked Braver Angels to do a workshop for progressives and moderates. Right? So the tensions within, and then recently we've been approached about doing something within the, not Minnesota, but outside Minnesota for the divisions between Trump supporters who are Republicans and people who can't stand Trump. And those, the animosities that can occur, because it's more of a traitor thing then, right? Like, I thought you were with me, but you're not. So lots of things going on out there in that big picture. And one of the ways this translates into relationships is that if I really can't stand Trump or Harris or whatever, I can't get to them, but I can get to you if you support them. So the people in our lives who think differently can stand in for all of the upset and the outrage we have towards the political elites, which really can compromise those relationships. So that's the big picture. And I want to talk about emotional aspects of managing ourselves now during this time of really toxic political polarization, and then how do we handle our relationships. Because those are things we can do something about. I think we can make decisions as individuals whether we're going to go with this flow of negativity or whether we're going to do something different in our own lives. So at the level of emotion, and so some of this will be my therapist hat here, is to separate the negative feelings about political leaders and about political parties from the people in my life who I care to be in relationship with. To try not to displace the feelings and the thoughts I have about those folks, to the people in my world. Because that's what's happening. And we get triggered if you're a conservative. In Brave Angels, we say red and blue, leaning more conservative, leaning more liberal. And you are really distressed about what you see as the woke culture of sort of disdain for people who don't say the right things. And then somebody in your family says something that sounds like that, boom, you're on them. And same way with the others. If you are outraged about Donald Trump and somebody in your family says, well, give the guy a chance. Yeah. Well, then you're down their throat, in part because they represent him in that case. So it's we're going to be living in continual outrage and defensiveness now if we don't manage our emotional reactivity. So if you are a blue who's the January 20th is a funeral coming, you are going to be tempted every time you look at the newspaper, turn the TV on, the breaking news, which is hardly ever breaking news. I don't know why my brain is, I go, breaking, I just turn to it, even though I know it's usually not breaking news, because 1 out of 20 times it is. So, but you're going to be, you're apt to respond with outrage and disdain emotionally every time Trump says something that seems terrible or outrageous. That's a tough way to live. And there's also the community organizers, the strategists like to say that outrage is not a strategy. Okay, and ventilating doesn't really help. There's good psychological research on this. The whole thing about getting your anger out. We used to teach that in the 70s. That doesn't work. It just feeds it. Okay, just feeds it. And similarly, if you're a Trump supporter, how not to feel defensive all the time, because people around you are going to be on him all the time. On him all the time. I remember we had our first ever Braver Angels workshop in about a month after the 2016 election. Remember that election? Okay, everybody was in shock, I think, including Trump. I mean, nobody thought he was going to win, right? And so we got together in Southwest Ohio, a group of 10 Hillary Clinton voters and 10 Donald Trump voters for 13 hours over a weekend. Ooh, should they say yes? And one of the things I remember that one of the Trump voters said when he watched his fellow Republicans be down on, he watched how they responded when Obama got elected, like on him immediately. The guy could do no good. And he saw that's what he and his fellow Reds who voted for Trump, that's what he saw the blues doing about Trump. In other words, an immediate negativity gives him no credence whatsoever. And he actually then understood, he said, his own reactivity to Obama. He could see it in the blues' reactivity to Trump, and he felt kind of bad about that. This is the kind of thing you can learn when you actually have a conversation with people, because nobody was just scoring political points, but there was in that group, we asked people why they came, and there was a woman who teared up. She's a blue, a Hillary Clinton voter, who said she was worried for her grandchildren and their future, and she teared up. And one of the Reds there was the local county Republican leader, and one of the things she said was that she realized that there were people who were truly fearful of Trump. That prior to that moment when this fellow townsperson, this neighbor, okay, who was not, scoring political points, she was tearful. The Republicans said, I get this now. That, because one of the points I'll be making, it's very hard to take seriously the fears of the other side. It's very hard. In a place where you turn on TV and everybody is scoring points, it's very hard. So I'll come back to more what we do for Braver Angels, but if you can get people talking in a safe enough environment where nobody's going to attack each other, there are learnings that can be held. A key thing that we teach in Braver Angels is to avoid expecting people in your life to think and feel like you do, and give up changing them. Let me pause on that one. To give up trying to change them, core beliefs, core values, attitudes, to give it up. Well, what's the downside? So we'll start some interaction here. What's the downside of trying to change somebody in your life, to trying to change their political attitudes? What's the downside there?
Make them angry.
Make them angry. Why? Why do people get angry?
Don't want to. Just don't want to change.
Yeah, I didn't ask you to change me. Yeah, right. I didn't come to you and say, help me change. So we get, it's called psychological reactance. It's a human thing. I have my autonomy, I have my thoughts. And if Henry David Thoreau once said that, beware if you see somebody approaching you with the obvious intent of doing you good, you should run for your life. Okay? And so the way this often works is that I am more in touch with the facts and with where the country is, what the problems are and the solutions, because my side is obviously better than yours, obviously, because why else would I hold my views? And so it's part of my job to enlighten you. And it always goes. I have to avoid saying go south, because that's, I did that once in New Orleans, and people, I guess I could say Minnesota, go south. And so it goes down it's bad for the other person in your relationship. Why is it bad for us when we do that? How does it affect us? If you are with loved ones and you are trying to change their political attitudes and beliefs. How is it bad for you? Yes.
Okay, so my husband's cousin is a polar explorer, right? And so he's kind of the hero of our family, right? And so our conservative brother-in-law and sister-in-law were having this discussion with my son, and they're asking news about Lonnie, his name, the polar explorer's name is Lonnie Dupree. And Steve says, well, he's going to Greenland and he's checking on the Inuit villages that he met up with 20 years ago, and he's looking for evidence of global warming. And with that, my brother-in-law turned away and stopped the conversation, did not speak any further. Yeah, so.
Okay, that's a good story of a click off.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to go back to my question though, and that is why for the person who is trying to change the other person. Yeah.
You can feel guilty, ashamed that you're not able to convince them, sad that they feel that way.
All kinds of things, yeah. Why am I not effective here?
right.
I feel bad for them, and if I love them, then I can feel bad for me. Keep going.
Probably prevents you from really getting them, understanding.
You're not going to understand them.
Is going to come back.
That's right. You're not going to really listen to them because when they talk, you're going to be preparing your rebuttal and your defense. Yes.
Even though it doesn't always feel like it, I think we all want our loving relationships to be healthy more than we want to be right.
On our best days, I think that is correct. Yeah.
If we succeed in feeling right and then lose the relationship,
Yes.
few of us are going to walk away
Absolutely.
being glad it went that way.
Yeah.
And if we are, we're just pretending usually.
Yeah, thank you for that. In fact, I just had a flashback to when I was in high school, I was a high school debater. Okay, so that's how I made friends, which is a small group. Okay, and then I got out of high school and started my adulthood and began to realize that not everybody likes to debate. In fact, I could debate either side of it. Okay, so I could ask what you think and then argue against it, didn't matter. And for me, it was like sport. And but people, they weren't my friends. And I told this to an older cousin, very wise man, who said something like you just said, what does it do to win the argument and lose the person? And here's the thing about influence. What we know from social psychology is your influence is more apt to occur over time in a respectful relationship than in a particular discussion. Okay? This is part of how people change. There's somebody who is respectful, caring, and viewing politics differently. It may make me curious to understand, as opposed to that. And then the last thing I'll say about this is that, in particular, this is in families. That if I can't emotionally self-regulate, knowing that somebody who's close to me thinks very differently and votes very differently, if I can't self-regulate, that's my problem. It's not their problem. Okay, this is now this is my couples therapist hat. It's this old line that somebody around here has got to grow and it's not going to be me. Okay? That's an accent of marriage. So and another phrase I heard recently, I would like you more if you were more like me. Okay? And so if you feel emotionally upset, distressed, dysregulated, at the very knowledge that somebody very close to you, so I'm talking about a parent, adult kids, somebody really close, that they are of the other political persuasion, that this is emotionally dysregulating, even when you're not talking to them. That's an opportunity for self-reflection and say, what's happening in me that I can't come to peace with the fact, because this is what we used to do with religion all the time, and some people still do. You know, this is why the Catholic Lutheran thing was like, how could you be? You know, they're damned, okay? So I have to get myself worked up because they're going to hell or something, right? And so, but we're doing that with politics now. So it's, now, I want to make a distinction. If this loved one who thinks and votes differently than I do, if they're trying to change me, if they're being nasty to me, well, that's a different story. I don't have to accept that. I don't have to accept you coming after me. I can, you know, we teach skills for how to self-defense skills, okay? Political discussions. But see, the difference is that if I'm trying to change you and then you come after me, well, I'm in it. I brought that on. But if I allow myself to accept that you are who you are, then I have to defend my boundaries if you try to change me, okay? But the thing I'm talking, and in family therapy terms, is called differentiation of self, that I can feel okay about me, even knowing that somebody I love thinks very different. So I don't have to go out of my way to uninvite you for Thanksgiving. This is what's happening. And there are couples divorcing. Couples who were inter-party marriage couples in the pre-Trump days, because you know Trump has, for particularly blues, they wouldn't think of divorcing their spouse or voting for one of the Bushes. But over Trump, people threaten it, and sometimes it happens. Now, of course, it's not the only issue that's going on, but it's in my whole career as a couples therapist, I've never seen what's happened since 2016. And what I'm suggesting is that if we can't self-regulate in the presence of somebody who thinks differently, that's not their problem. And the thing is, if I get emotionally distressed knowing you think the way you do, then I'm going to try to change you so I feel better. And that's a ticket for disaster for the relationship and also for me just personally. Because it doesn't work to think and believe that the only way I can feel better in this family is if you change your mind. Go for it.
Can you talk a bit about the distinction between like just people having different ideas, like, you know, live and let live, right? Gay marriage, people used to care, people don't care. Because live and let live, right? Love who you want to love. That feels like that's how we're talking about it. Can you talk a bit about how we can apply that thinking to when a person feels a genuine threat?
Yeah, so thank you. When they feel a genuine threat, sure. Well, this is the distinction between you know, calmly saying where you are, and choosing when you're going to say that. So, I mean, trans is the issue now. I mean, gay marriage is much less huge. Okay, and the challenge I'll say the challenge for blues. I'm going to make a wild guess that there are more blues in the room than reds. I think two of the reds spoke up, which is great. So what can happen is that somebody on the blue side can take something like getting the pronoun wrong as a huge attack, and not give the person grace. So they call grace she all this time, and so everything can get personalized. On the other hand, understanding that people who do feel like their identity is threatened and not taken seriously at best, that they do have feelings about this. But to be able to not reject, it doesn't mean you have to make this relative your best friend. But what's happening now is that people, basis of these family members do not accept transgender identities. They can't come to Thanksgiving. That's what we've gotten to. Okay, they're not invited to the wedding, and what I'm suggesting is that's a dangerous path. And not everybody agrees with me on that. I gave a talk at a conference recently where people were very upset with me for suggesting that family bonds are really worth protecting. Now, then telling somebody, we're not going to get into that discussion here, okay? My kid, let's say my kid is trans, or, you know, if you're okay with her or him and we're just going to love one another here, then please come. But we're not going to debate the issue here. That would be an example of people can have their viewpoints and also have some boundaries. So the second point, avoid expecting others to change. And by the way, I'll say that this also applies to people on your own side, because what's happening in blue relationships and red relationships, that people are polarizing on how blue or how red you are. Okay? And you can get into pretty ferocious discussions there. And also, some people do not like to talk about politics. And sometimes they're married to people who love to talk about politics. And I'm applying the same principle, live and let live, that there's nothing wrong with you if you do not want to get into politics, and there's also nothing wrong with you if you do. And to be able to decide, you can go in and out of these discussions. So if there's by the way, if you're interested in, if you were to Google Braver Angels Loved Ones Divided, there's a series of videos, YouTube videos of interviews that I did, coaching sessions with married couples. One of them is just on my mind now because he did not want to talk politics. She did. He was conservative, she was liberal, and it didn't go well. Now the session went well, but it had to be. She had to give up trying to change both his political views and his wish and his desire not to talk about politics. So two ways she was trying to change him. Okay? And she was defining him not wanting to get into it as not caring about her. That's what I'm saying, and I helped her see that's on her. That's on her. That's not on him. If I interpret you saying, I'd rather watch the ball game, as like, you don't care about me, that's for me to show. Now on his end, he would just put in little digs all the time. Now, of course, there are no men who do that normally, but he did. And so he would dig at her and tell her she was overreacting and naive, so he would get back. So it usually goes both ways. But they had to learn to, once they learned to respect each other's boundaries, not change each other, and not insist on a conversation, then they actually had a pretty lovely conversation right in the session. Okay, so if you watch those, you can see how that emerged. So a few more points. Question your assumptions about why people voted for the other side. There's a lot of oversimplification people do when they describe how anybody votes for, in this case, Trump or Harris. What we know basically from polls, and what I certainly have seen, is that most people have complex reasons why they voted the way they did. It doesn't mean they're all in. That a lot of people are choosing the lesser of the evils. A lot of people in the last election would have preferred to have none of the above or alternatives. And there's nothing wrong, by the way, if they were enthusiastic, that's all fine too. But until we know why people vote the way they do, and you have that conversation, which is very hard to have if I'm distressed that you did it. Okay? Unless you have that conversation, you don't understand the complexities. And so when we don't understand, we fill in. So if you're Trump, you're just a cult follower. Okay? Or you're a rich person who just feels like you can use Trump. And if you vote for Harris, you're one of the woke. You're looking for handouts because big government's going to give a lot of people handouts. You're not really thoughtful. I mean, there's all of these sayings that people like. There's a saying in Republican circles that if you're if you're not liberal or liberal when you're young, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative when you're older, you have no brain. Okay? We have all these self-serving kinds of things that are completely oversimplified. So some of what has happened for me in Braver Angels, the leadership of Braver Angels is all half red, half blue. And so I'm in constant communication with people who are different from me politically. And then it's impossible just to stereotype anymore. It's impossible. It's not. I can still do it. But it's harder for me to stereotype when I know people who are smart as I am, care about the world, good people who voted differently. And they can tell me, but some of what you have to do, I remember with a colleague of mine who was going to vote differently, we spent half an hour with me just listening and clarifying. And I didn't even tell him where I was. I think he knew. And we ran out of time. And he said, well, next time you can tell me where you are. But it took a half an hour to get the complexities of why he voted the way he did. And if I had been arguing back, if I'd been questioning his assumptions, I wouldn't have gotten the complexity. He would have been defending himself. And even, it wouldn't have necessarily been a bad conversation. That might be okay for another time. But for this conversation, my goal was to understand. My goal was to be curious. So that somebody, I'm an academic, this guy was an academic, so we had lots in common, similar age, and really thinking very differently about the election. And I felt better. So this is the personal gain. I felt better after that conversation. But I had to let go of injecting my own view. And including, as I said, we ran out of time. And then we'll have other conversations later. Next point is to work on understanding how people see themselves politically. This is connected to the assumptions. If you can't explain somebody's rationale for why they vote the way they do, why they're part of their party, whatever, if you can't explain it well enough for somebody to say, yes, that's it, you've gotten my point, then you haven't understood them. So we're going to be coming up to some very serious discussions about immigration in this country. And we are all at risk of making big time assumptions about how people are different, because I'm predicting there's going to be a lot of upset. And the challenge is, and even if you don't have an individual in your life that you can have this conversation with, you could read, you could listen to podcasts, you could exercise your curiosity to understand the reasons why people hold a very different view about what we should do with our immigration system. And what I'm suggesting is that you could set a goal for yourself to be able to explain. Let's say if you're a blue, you could, and you're listening to Reds on immigration who think we should really deport lots of folks now because if they're here illegally, they should go. You could apply yourself to understanding how a smart, reasonable person who isn't cruel could hold that view, even if you disagree with it strongly. And the same thing for people on the other side. Because when we have conversations about in our workshops, we ask people to identify the stereotypes that each side has of the other. And so the stereotype of Reds around immigration is they're anti-immigrant. And then, of course, you lead to, well, did your family immigrate here? Isn't this a little contradictory? Okay. Or you're married to an immigrant? You know, gotcha. Boom, wiped out. And then I'll brag about how I ran into this woman, and I just asked her the question, and she was paralyzed. Phew, man, I just, one for my side. Okay. And similarly, we learned that the stereotype that a lot of reds have of blues is open borders, let them come, send ships over, have half of Africa move here. And why? See, the first one is why you're going to crack down, because you don't care about people and you want to keep the country for yourself. So that's the moral thing, okay? And you're cruel, you don't care about people. The other one is, well, why would we open the borders? They're going to love Democrats. They're going to support Democrats. It's going to be a complete hegemony of Democrats for a generation if they open the borders, or if they don't put people out. They're going to be so devoted to the Democratic Party. People think that way, just as people think you're just cruel. So we fill in the blanks, is what I'm saying, if we don't have nuanced understandings of a range of people. And of course there are going to be people on fringes. There are going to be people who hate immigrants. But that's not the majority. And there are going to be some people who are for completely open borders. And I'm not sure what planet they're from, but okay, they have it. Okay? But what we do is, when I've learned this, is that we cherry pick, this is the confirmatory bias, we cherry pick the most extreme positions on the other side and say that's what characterizes that side. For our own side, we say, well, those are the crazies. Those are the crazies. And I remember having a conversation with a colleague once where I really got this. We were talking about people who were extremes on both of our parties. And he really believed that the people on my party who were extreme are really closely connected with the mainstream. Like, it's just a step or two from that crazy idea to the administration, whoever's, just a step or two, okay? They're organically connected, the extremes. And so if that party stays in power, they're going to take over. Whereas his own party, there's always crazies. They're outliers. They have no influence. They're crazy. And that was a really important moment for me to understand that's what we do. This is the bias we have, okay? Your relative who breaks the law is like a deeply criminal person or be locked up. Mine is a disturbed young man who needs help. Okay, it's because you're other and this is somebody I care about. So if you have a simple answer to why people hold their views, it's inadequate. And then this translates into our relationships, because every time somebody who's close to me says something like that, I translate it as they are stupid, and they are ill-motivated, and of course, that's not me. So 2 more points. Don't dismiss the fears of your side as exaggerated or point scoring. Much of our current politics is fear-based. Think about this last campaign, okay? It's either fear of Trump is crazy, he's going to run the country, or it's fear of runaway inflation, crime, and the kind of woke world. Okay, fear. A lot of it is fear-based. Human beings are wired this way. We pay more attention to fear than we do to hope. Partly because this is how we evolved. Your ancestors who said, "I'm not going out into that forest. I heard that little roar." They survived, and the ones that said, "Well, it's maybe just a little cat, a little kitty," they were eaten. They didn't pass their genes on. So I've only absorbed this in the last 6 months as I tried to understand why people in my life vote and think differently. That we're very much in touch with the fears we have of the other side, and we tend to dismiss the fears of the political other of our own side as point scoring. And I think that, I'll just make a kind of a fanciful thought here that I have no evidence for, that I think that Trump supporters are more aware of the fears of blues of Trump. I mean, he's out there, right? Says a lot of stuff, okay? And so the Trump supporters I know are not surprised that many Democrats and blues are scared of the guy. But most blues that I know are not really in touch with the fears that Reds have, and here's how I'm going to play it out. Not of Harris in particular, let's say, but of multiple presidential administrations that would be Democratic. And then here's the translation of that, I believe, that for many conservatives, liberals have already won the culture, higher education, and the media. Those are largely liberal. And I think that's accurate.
It's not accurate.
So I
Most
just
of the
give you-
media in the country is
sir,
left-wing.
So this is my thing here. So it's not irrational. This gentleman agrees. So we can have a debate, but it's not. I'm in higher education. It's deeply blue. It is deeply, deeply blue. Okay, I mean that's the world I know. I've dealt with a lot of media that's deeply blue as well. So a conservative perspective is that blues have already taken over the popular culture, higher education, and the media, then add the power of the executive branch. And there is genuine fear that over time, not necessarily in the next 4 years, but over time, that their liberties could be taken away. So for example, if you are a conservative religious person and you believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, you may fear that eventually there could be an administration. I'm not saying this is accurate. I'm saying it's understandable, is really what I'm saying. That administrations come along and say, why should we give tax relief, tax benefits, nonprofits, to groups who preach hate? And then, again, if you're blue, you may think, well, but then there are anecdotes that happen. Like in Western Canada, a conservative Protestant minister who preached on a Sunday about gay marriage and God's plan for marriage and so on. And then he wrote a letter to the editor repeating that in his local newspaper. He was called up on charges by the Civil Rights Commission, wasn't the court, but they had power. And they fined him, they ordered him silenced. He agreed or didn't agree, I can't remember the details. It got thrown out of court, but it was a 2-year battle before that court said that was way, way overreach, way overreach. So if you're blue, you say, well, yeah, eventually it was litigated and that was a way overreach of a violation of free speech. But if you're a red, you go, that could be the future. That could be the future. So I'm saying this not to convince anybody that that is valid, okay? But it's real. It's real. And in my own mind, not silly. There's silly stuff that happens, like Hillary Clinton was in a child molestation ring. I mean, there's silly stuff that happens, but that stuff is not. So what I'm saying is when absorbing, and so again for Reds, what Reds tend to do with the Trump stuff is to say, oh, don't take that literally and seriously. And that's dismissing real concerns that this guy is an authoritarian. If he had his way, he would be the dictator, he would be Putin. And when he talks about Panama and Greenland and all, and so for a Trump supporter, I'm saying it's not productive in relationships to just say, oh, well, he's just a talker and he's going to be surrounded by people who won't do that. Even if that's what you think is true. In other words, it's dismissive of people's real concerns. And part of what I've learned is that if underneath for somebody who disagrees with me, if I can understand, even if they are not fully articulating it, if I can understand the deep worries and fears that Resolues have of each other's power, of power, sustained power over time, and I go into these conversations differently. As opposed to if I think that my side is basically pretty benign and your side is a threat. And polling data supports me in this. Both sides think the other side is a threat. And my own view is they both tend to dismiss any validity of the other side. And then finally, what I've learned is to focus on shared values and aspirations for the country. One of the first things I learned in Braver Angels, where we did a bus tour in 2017. We went through a whole bunch of towns, the East Coast. It was Representative John Boehner's old bus and his bus driver. It was a Tea Party guy, Nick. My wife was on the bus tour with us. And so we were doing workshops over and over. We were like a B-League basketball team going, smelly gyms and that kind of thing. But a lot of repetitions. And part of what I learned was that I was confusing policy views with fundamental values and aspirations. Okay, so people wanting to pull away from public schools as we know them, have more charter schools, have more private funding, that kind of thing. If you believe that's going to undermine education, then it's tempting to think you want to undermine our children's education. When you get up in the morning, you're hoping to undermine our children. Hardly anybody does. What I learned was, what I came to believe, is that we have fierce policy difference, but if you can get to underlying values, so like with healthcare, with Representative Dean Phillips, I led a whole series of red-blue conversations in his district, mostly around healthcare. And when we ask people, what are your concerns about healthcare, and what life experiences inform your concerns, you could hardly tell the difference between a conservative and a liberal in the room. You could hardly tell the difference. Now, if we started with, should we have government-supported universal health care? And then you would think that there was no commonality. Everybody was concerned about quality. Everybody was concerned about cost. Everybody was, access. Everybody was concerned. So it depends on where the conversation goes. So as I finish up, we've had the opportunity to do workshops with elected officials who are unhappy campers, by the way. It's no fun to be, unless you're the boss, it's no fun, okay? And so the New Hampshire State Legislature had us come there. We had two retired legislators, a Republican and Democrat, who invited us in. And this was as the pandemic was ending. And it was 8 Republicans, 8 Democrats. I walked into this chamber. The Democrats were sitting on this wall with masks. The Republicans were sitting on this wall with no masks. It was like, shirts and skins and basketball. And they were so far apart in this big room that we had to use a microphone for people to say why they came. But we got them into small groups in separate spaces, 4 and 4. And we had everybody answer this. It took 5 minutes to answer this question. What life experiences have influenced your values and beliefs about public policy and public service? What life experiences have influenced your values and beliefs about public policy and public service? Give everybody time to think about this, 5 uninterrupted minutes. And we got their stories, we got life experiences. And one of the most powerful ones was a Democrat who was sitting over here. He said he grew up in the foster care system. He said his father had abandoned the family, his mother suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, and he and his siblings bounced around the foster care system. And this was a driving force for him to get into public service and legislate to make a difference for those kids. He no sooner finished than a Republican said to him, here said, I don't believe this. I grew up in the foster care system. And he told his story, a driving force in his life. He doesn't believe much in government solutions. So he worked with faith communities, he worked in the voluntary sector, he got into job training, but it was a galvanizing value for him to make a difference for these kids. It was quite a moment. And when we asked people at the end what they were taking with them from this experience, the Republican guy said something that I always like to quote. He said, what I'm taking with me is that you can't fight somebody in the same way when you know their heart. You can't fight somebody in the same way when you know their heart. So the way we can translate, this isn't going to solve all the problems of our country, but we can do something as individuals to try to get the stories behind our loved ones' views. Barry Virgil's principle is behind every passionate political belief, there's a story. If you can get to the story, if you ask somebody, I'm just curious how you feel strongly about this. Where's that come from? They get below the bullet points. They get below not sounding like a politician or somebody on Fox or MSNBC. They're telling the story. And even if you end up not agreeing, you can make a connection. So we can either in our own lives be bridge builders, or we can go with the kind of toxic culture. And I'd always like to end with, I'm happy to stick around for comments and questions, with Abraham Lincoln, who in his first inaugural address just before the Civil War. And the historians are saying we're probably as polarized as we've ever been, except for the Civil War period. So here's what he said. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. Sorry about that. So I'll say it again. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory stretching from every patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land will yet swell the cords of the Union when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. So thanks for having me here.